Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm the Whiskey Anorak. This is review 12A and we're going to be looking at a expression from Springbank distillery called Longrow. Now a couple of reviews ago I reviewed the standard 10-year-old and I've bought it many times over the years. Same with Longrow. This is the peated expression. Longrow Peated, it's a no age statement whiskey bottled at 46%. It does say on the back that it's not chill filtered. It doesn't mention natural colour though. I think they've missed that out, but just a point of note that it doesn't say that. This particular bottle, when you hold it up to the light, you look in there, there's a lot of sediment. As I've mentioned before, for Cadenhead's bottlings, anything by J&A Mitchell, basically Kilkerran, Springbank, Hazelburn, Longrow, it's all filtered to a lesser degree than some other bottlers and distilleries in my opinion, and it's something you can just clearly see when you look in the bottle that it is just swimming around. So yeah, I'm the Whiskey Anorak. I'm sat in my bedroom reviewing a whiskey for you which I've enjoyed quite a few times over the years. I'm going to pour a little bit, not too much, but we're just going to pour a little bit, and I'm going to talk about the smell, I'm going to talk about the sensations, I'm going to talk about the texture of the whiskey and the taste, and then I'm going to add water and then do it again. And then at the end of this episode, I'm going to introduce the whiskies that are going to be up for the public vote in part 12C. So whilst this is just opening up for a couple of minutes, I'll just remind you that on my channel I do A, B's and C's. A is the review, B is further information, and C is a comparison. Part B coming up after this one will be all about no age statement whiskies. I'm going to have some examples out for you. I'm going to talk through what I think are different types and reasons that have happened in terms of non-age statement bottlings, and a bit of the history as well. So hopefully that'll be interesting for you. So I have got some notes written down just to remind me, but the actual distillery that Longrow producing is of course Springbank. Now how they produce it is they essentially miss out the middle still. They just use the wash still and the spirit still, which is a still at the end, so it's double distilled rather than 2.5 times distilled. So that's going to lend itself to being heavier. Overall there's going to be less recirculation, and that suits quite well the peated style that this whiskey most definitely is. So before Springbank started doing Longrow expressions, and they started producing it in about 1973, there was actually a distillery called Longrow literally right next door to Springbank. And from memory, it opened in 1824. Did I get that right? I did. And it closed in 1890s. And essentially, they are using some of the buildings at Springbank. It is essentially the bottling hall on the site now. That's what it is, the old Longrow building. So I think it's good that they're keeping the expression alive and, calling out the name for that. So similar to Hazelburn, which is triple distilled Springbank, this does not consist of essentially a lot of the production at Springbank. It's 10% of the production is this, another 10% is Hazelburn, and the rest of the 80% is Springbank. It's quite a well, I'm in the UK and this is quite well available. Pretty much any time I want to buy this, it's available. I'm not sure where you are if you're not in the UK, but I'm pretty sure they do quite large batches of this because it always seems to be available. So that's a good thing if you want to try Longrow. It's, in terms of the age, of course it's a no age statement, but you hear talk online that it's around between 6 and 9 years old. But of course we have to remember, when it's a non-age statement, that means that they can use younger whiskey if they want to. 3 years and a day is the youngest they could use, just to sort of bring it up a bit and increase the intensity. And I suspect that that is what they do, and that's why it is a non-age statement release, unlike Springbank 5, which is a young age statement. In the case of Longrow Peated, I think they keep it open because they want to balance the flavour rather than necessarily have an age statement. I'll get into that more in part B. So the peat that they source, and it's the same for Springbank as well, is actually from two different places. They source wet peat from Aberdeenshire, is that right? No, got that the opposite way around. They source dry peat from Aberdeenshire and wet peat from Inverness, basically. And those two types of peat have a different usage. So of course, as we know, Springbank does everything on site, and from malting the barley to drying it, kilning it. In the case of Longrow, they have an extended smoking time. I think it actually says on the back 48 hours they dry it for using peat. So to get the fire going, what they'll do is they'll use the dry peat, and bear in mind these are both Highland peats as well, so this is not Isla peat that's in this. they'll get the fire going with the dry peat, and then they'll add the wet peat to make it smoky and really smoke up in the kiln essentially, and get all that, the phenols impregnated into the malted barley. So it's quite a potent whiskey, I think, the first time you try it, but I've actually got quite well used to it now, and with it being at 46%, it doesn't have the impact that I remember the first time I tried it, but it's still quite impactful. But there's more to it than that. It's quite a complex whiskey, even at a relatively young age. So have I missed anything out? Yes, another interesting fact about the peat, if you wanted to know, is they did use local peat from Campbelltown at one point, but they found it to be too sandy and it was blocking up the kiln. All the grates in the kiln was essentially getting covered in glass, because obviously when sand's heated it turns to glass, and it was blocking up all the vents. So they moved away from that, and they now source it from the Highland region purely. And again, it's not stated on here, but it's known that this is essentially lost my train of thought then. This is essentially a mix of bourbon and sherry cask. We don't know the percentage. I think it does vary. This particular one, I think it's like, if I was to guess, I'd say it's about 70% bourbon, 30% sherry. We don't know what sort of sherry. I've mentioned this before, how we're not giving that much information from Springbank Distillery compared to some of the newer ones. But let's just get into the nose and all that good stuff. So the nose, the peat is there immediately, but it's a smoky peat and malty. It's not overly fruity on the nose. It's quite almost like a stale smoked peat. It smells oily, that's for sure. Touch of vanilla, and there is a touch of dried fruit coming from the sherry cask. But overall, it's quite well balanced on the nose. So I'm going to give you the sensations now. Salty, sour, savoury as well. Touch of bitter towards the end. Not really getting any sweet from this. Maybe a little touch right at the beginning from the peat, but it's very much a savoury salt bitter, I would say, in the sensations without water. So let me have another little sip and I'll tell you about the texture of this one. Oily, I'd say it's like a medium oiliness. There is a little bit of heat. It's not right at the front, it's more towards the middle, but it's noticeable. It's noticeable that I think there's a proportion of younger whiskey, maybe 4 or 5 years old, but perhaps predominantly between 6 and 9. But without being told the information, it's hard to say. And, you know, I'm just guessing that the reason they don't give that out is so they have the license to change the mix to try and get a consistency. But if you look at reviews online from different reviewers, you'll see that there is batch variation. And just whilst I'm on it as well, they do print the batch on the side of the bottle, if I can find it. And this particular one is from the 25th of the 8th, 2025. So a relatively recent one, about just under a year old, as I record this in June 2026. So I've had, just to talk briefly about my history with the Longrow, I've got a few bottles. I've got a 21-year-old, I've got a red cask, which I think was a tawny port, and I've got this one. I have had this particular expression 2 or 3 more times in the past. I think it's twice actually, and I've been quite impressed with it, and it represents pretty good value for money. So let me just give you the taste notes and I'll add some water, and then we'll get on to redoing it all again. Taste matches well with the smell. It's a malty, some fruit there now actually, like apple, stewed apple. The peat is not a blast at the beginning. It slowly builds without the addition of water, and I know that it will come out more once you add water, but it's quite, I would describe it as quite well balanced in terms of all of the different notes that you're getting. And I will say right now, obviously I'm rushing things because this is a review. I normally take my time, and if you take your time with this, you will get access to different notes over time as you go through smelling and tasting it. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water. I've not put much in that glass, so I'm literally just going to add one. That's probably about 10 drops, so probably about 1/4 of a teaspoon, something like that. And I should mention the versimetry is very thick. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but I'll just swirl it just on the off chance that you can. But it's holding it up to my light here. I can see it's very thick. and it does go cloudy with the addition of water as well. So it's bottled to a very high standard in terms of presentation, so that's all good stuff. I think the information about what's in the bottle could be a little bit better these days, you know, if you compare it to the rivals, but you know, it is honest information, and it's definitely not from a marketing perspective. They're just giving, you know, what they think you want to know. So okay, so now I've added this water, I'm going to do the smell and taste notes again. I'm going to introduce the bottles for the comparison for 12C. So on the nose, with the addition of water, the peat subsides a bit and you get a bit more fruit. I'm getting some sultanas. I'm getting a bit of oak now, actually, but it's like a dry oak. It's more interesting in my opinion when you add water. There's a lot more going on with it. The maltiness is still there. It's, yeah, let's see if we can get anything else. Yeah, it's definitely malt forward, peat subsided. It's a dry, smoky peat, and it's just delicious. I wouldn't say in any one time frame, you know, as I take a snapshot now and smell it, that it's that complex. You know, there's not a load of stuff going on, but it does evolve in the glass and different notes become more prominent. I know if I leave it longer than I've got time for here, you will get a lovely sort of caramel toffee note that comes out, which I tend to get after I've left it in the glass for about half an hour or so. So it's a very good whiskey, and if you've not had Longrow before, I highly recommend it as a place to start because it is quite well available, and I don't think you'll be disappointed unless you want an absolute blast of peat, because in my opinion this isn't that. It's quite powerful with the peat, but it's a bit more restrained than say the likes of, you know, the likes of Lafroig or something like that, or even some, you know, some, well, like the Dalmore I had recently. There's a peated Dalmore I had from the Cadenheads club, and that is very, very intense on the peat. This not so much, but it is there, and it's like a, rather than a standout, it's just a contributing factor, I would say. So sensations, let's see if that's changed. A little bit more sweet at the start now. Salty, definitely. Bitter. There is a touch of sour that I'm just getting at the tail end that I'm wondering if that's from the sherry cask. But yeah, it has changed a little bit sweeter on the arrival, I would say, with the addition of water. Texture, I'm guessing this is going to be the same, but we'll do it anyway because I only added a little bit of water. Yeah, it's still just as oily, maybe a touch diluted as you would expect, but it's got that oily mouth coating feeling. Definitely not waxy, definitely not light. It is sort of medium to heavily oiled, I would say. So let me just have a little sip of water to rinse my palate out, and then I'll tell you the taste notes and I'll tell you what I think about this bottling overall. So, ashy peat. Contrary to the nose, the peat hasn't died up, it's actually come forward. It's ashy peat, it's malty, I'm getting some dried fruits, sultana. It's got a little bit of that toffee coming out now. I get some vanilla. There's quite a smoky oak to it as well towards the back end. It's really quite a good dram, and I will say that as the level's gone down, I've had this bottle, by the way, for it's over 4 months. It's quite a while I've had this. I think it was last year, 2025, that I got this towards the end. So I've had this for quite a while. I've been trying it sporadically, but this week I have been having it every night, as I tend to do before I do a review of a whiskey. But before, like this week, it was probably still down to like about there. So I've been trying it, and it has got better as it's gone down the bottle, as I explained in that video I did, the part B about bottle fill levels. You know, this one stands to that rule, which is getting better as I go down the bottle. And yeah, what do I think of it? Would I buy the exact same bottle again? And I'm not going to go into the details of saying the exact same serial number again, but I would buy another Longrow Peated in the future, and I have done previously. This is like the third bottle that I've bought in my whiskey journey. So yes, I would. Would I buy similar bottles again? Yes, and I have. I would buy perhaps a different non-age statement bottling from Longrow, I would try that. I've also got the bottles that I mentioned previously as well. So yeah, I would definitely buy them again. And of course, I would buy from the distillery again. And I have done. So it's, you know, it's a good bottling. Any negatives I've got to say about it, I just think the information could be a little bit better about the casks that are actually involved in this. But I do understand that they probably want to balance the whiskey for each batch to get an overall profile, and that's why they do this. But this is something I'm going to talk about a bit more in detail in part 12b, when I'm going to discuss non-age statements in whiskey. So I'll move this to the side now, and then I'm going to introduce the whiskies that are going to feature in part 12c, which is a comparison. So if you've seen the channel before, you'll know what the setup is. I choose a bottle myself that I want to compare to this, and I've chose this. This is Kilkerran Heavily Peated from Glengyle Distillery, bottled at 58.4%. There's a little bit of an unfair comparison, but I will dilute it when I do the comparison. It does state clearly, I'll just put the backside up to you as well, where you can see that it says batch 12 in the red letters, and you can also see hopefully clearly that it says non-chill filtered, no added colouring. So that's all good to know. I've chose this because I think it's a really good bottling. It's relatively available as well. I'm not sure it's quite as available as the Longrow Peated, but you can certainly get your hands on the batches, on different batches at any time. And it's a different angle on Longrow and Springbank, but I would say it's a worthwhile comparison to do to the distillery that's literally, you know, next door to it, and see what the difference are between their heavily peated expressions, because perhaps not in total, but a lot of the malt in here will have been produced from Longrow in Springbank on their malting floor, and it will have been dried there as well. So the malt is largely going to be to the same spec as the Longrow. So I thought that would be an interesting comparison. So I'm going to get into the three choices now. So the first one, Glasgow 1770. This is the recently released batch 3, bottled at, what's it bottled at? 61%. It's rich and smoky. Like I said, batch number 3, number of bottles is 1,000, and it's essentially matured in virgin oak and finished in Pedro Jimenez sherry cask. This is very intense. This is, in terms of intensity of the peat and the barbecue notes, it's just, yeah, I'm really enjoying this. I've not had much, I've had a couple of drams, but it's very interesting. This bottle's going to feature in this one or a similar one, because I've got the non-peated version as well from batch 3. It's going to feature in part B that's coming up after this, because I want to talk about different age statements, because this isn't actually an age statement technically, but you can quite easily find out the age of this. So that's something that I'll discuss. But I think this is a good choice if you want a more intense non-age statement peated whiskey to compare to the Longrow. The next one is the Lagg Corriecravie, bottled at 55%. This was released like a few years, about 2 years ago, I believe. I don't know, I don't remember seeing any date code on it, but essentially this is the same as the Kilmorey edition, I think, which is just 3 years in bourbon cask. This one's finished in sherry cask. I don't know if it gives much detail on there, it doesn't, but essentially it's the other distillery on the Isle of Arran, and it's about, I would say it's less than 4 years old. It's probably about 3.5 years old, but it does say non-chill filtered natural colour. So this is a good one to compare a younger whiskey that is, you know, very young, even compared to this. So that'll be good if you want to see what a very young whiskey compares to the Longrow Peated. And then the last one for the public vote is this one, Ardnahoe Balsa. This is quite an interesting bottling from a distillery that uses worm tubs on Islay, the only one. This is bottled at 50% ABV, no artificial colouring, no chill filtration, and the Balsa is essentially predominantly matured in Oloroso sherry cask. I don't think it tells us whether the first fill or second fill, and it doesn't really tell us the percentage, but let's just guess predominantly it's probably about 70% sherry cask, 30% bourbon. But maybe the information's out there online, but I've not seen it and it's not on the bottle. But this is a good one if you want to try, you know, to see how a Islay peated whiskey compares to, you know, a Campbelltown peated whiskey that's using Highland, peat. It should be quite a good comparison, you know, between those, because they both use worm tubs as well, which is another interesting fact to be aware of. So that's going to be pretty much it from me. So if you go to the post tab on my main channel page, you will see that this is out now, and just choose whichever one you want. I'll put the full descriptions of them on there as well so you can see, and whichever one wins the vote will be featuring in part 11C. So this episode will be coming out on a Sunday, part B will be coming out on a Tuesday, and the part C will be coming out on the following Friday. And essentially that gives you quite a few days to vote, because I closed the vote on middle of Thursday UK time, so it'll give you like quite a few days to vote. So yeah, and I appreciate you voting. So I hope you found this interesting. So yeah, I like this bottle. It's not the most, you know, dynamic, but it does change over time in the glass, and it will give you a really good introduction to Longrow. And yeah, I've bought it 3 times in the past, so hopefully that says it all. So thank you very much for your time. I'll see you in part B, where we're going to talk about non-age statements in a bit more detail. Thanks for your time. Bye for now.